He walked through the front door of that mansion like he owned the world. Gray suit, leather briefcase, the smile of a man who has never once had to make his own coffee. He looked at me, gave me that half glance that barely registers a person, and said, "Hey, sweetheart, can you grab me a coffee, black, and hang my coat over there?" I smiled. I took the coat. I walked out. 20 minutes later, when the attorney opened her folder and read the name of the new co-owner of the company he was trying to save, he looked up, and I was sitting across the table from him. The silence in that room lasted about 4 seconds. I'm going to hold on to that silence for the rest of my life, because for 4 years I was exactly what that man saw when he looked at me in that hallway. The cleaning lady, the one who brings the coffee, the one who hangs the coat, the invisible woman in the apron that nobody notices when she walks into a room and nobody thanks when she leaves. I knew that role by heart. It was the only role that Mrs. Patricia Whitmore ever thought I deserved. The one who serves, the one who stays quiet, the one who accepts. What she never understood is that invisible doesn't mean ignorant. It means someone decided not to see. And when you stop waiting to be seen by someone who refuses to look, you discover that you were always whole. The story I'm about to tell you is not pretty at the start. There are parts of it that still cost me something to say out loud, but it has an ending that I built with every humiliation I swallowed, every sleepless night, every decision I made when I was flat on the floor, and that ending is mine. I earned it with work, with pain, and with the certainty that no wealthy woman, no matter how big her house or how much money her husband makes, has the right to decide how much you're worth. If you've ever been made to feel like you didn't exist in the place where you worked, like your name didn't matter, like your rights were a privilege instead of a guarantee, this story is for you. Tell me in the comments, have you ever worked somewhere and felt invisible even when you were doing everything right? Where are you watching from? Like the video and subscribe, because what comes next changed my life in ways I'm still learning to understand. To understand what happened in that room, I need to take you back 4 years. I need to take you to Memphis, Tennessee, to a 31-year-old woman with a 4-year-old daughter, no job, and a phone number for a woman in Atlanta who might know of a housekeeping position. My name is Darlene Moss. I grew up in Memphis, the daughter of a school cafeteria worker and a construction laborer. Small house, tab at the corner store, vacations that were the Sundays when my daddy didn't have to work. We didn't have much, but my mother had a saying she repeated so often it became part of my bones. "Darlene, what you put in your mind, nobody can take away." She said it while folding laundry, while packing school lunches, while counting change from the grocery store. And I believed her. I believed her so much that for years I worked days and studied nights, first as a cashier, then as an office clerk, then as an administrative assistant at a small property management company in Memphis. When that company downsized and let me go, I was 29 years old, a daughter named Brianna who was 4, and a savings account with about $2,000. Brianna's father had been out of the picture before she was born. I was raising her alone, and suddenly I had no income, no immediate prospects, and a little girl who depended on me for everything. It was my cousin Yvette who gave me the first step. She worked in Nashville as a house cleaner and told me she knew a woman in Atlanta named Miss Louise who had been a housekeeper for a wealthy family in Buckhead for years and had heard about a position opening up at a big house in Sandy Springs. The family was wealthy, paid well for the work, and needed someone to live in, a full-time live-in housekeeper with a room and meals included. I thought about it for 2 nights. I thought about Brianna, who would stay with my mother in Memphis while I got settled. I thought about those $2,000 that wouldn't last more than a couple of months. I thought about what my mother would say, "Go, baby, but don't lose yourself." I went. The interview was on a Monday morning. The house was on a private road off Roswell Road in Sandy Springs. Gated, mature trees lining the driveway, luxury SUVs in the 3-car garage. The electric gate opened onto a long driveway, manicured landscaping everywhere. A house that had to be at least 6,000 square feet with a pool visible in the backyard. I had taken 2 buses to get there, carrying my shoulder bag and trying to swallow the nerves before I rang the bell. The woman who answered the door was Patricia Whitmore herself, around 48, highlighted blonde hair cut to her chin, long manicured nails in a deep burgundy, wearing pressed linen pants at 10 in the morning on a Monday. The kind of woman who wakes up already put together. She looked me over in less than 2 seconds, the time she needed to sort me into the right category in her mind. The interview lasted 30 minutes. She asked about my experience with deep cleaning, cooking, laundry, availability. I answered everything calmly. At one point, she asked if I had children. I told her I had a 4-year-old daughter in Memphis with my mother. She made an expression that wasn't quite disapproval. It was assessment, like someone calculating whether that would become a problem down the line. I need someone fully committed, she said. I can't have someone whose mind is somewhere else. I said I understood, that I was committed. She looked at me for another second, then said, "The salary is $2,200 a month, room and board included. You're off Thursdays and Sundays. I'll call you if I decide to move forward." She called me Wednesday. The first signs that this wasn't going to be simple showed up before the end of my first week. Not big things. The small things you learn to recognize when you've worked enough to know the difference between a demanding employer and one who sees you as less than. First, my room was in the basement, next to the laundry room, maybe 100 square feet, with a window that faced the concrete foundation of the neighboring property. When I arrived, there was an old mattress, a dresser with a stuck drawer, and a bare bulb. I asked Miss Louise, who had worked in the house for 6 years as the cook and was the only one who welcomed me with any real warmth, if it was always like this. She looked at me with the expression of someone who has learned that certain questions have no useful answer. "That's how it is," she said. Second, Mrs. Whitmore called me girl. Not once in the first week did she use my name. Second week still. "Girl, get that," and "Girl, did you finish the master bath?" I said my name twice. After the third time she said "girl," I let it go, because I needed the job. Third, there was a camera in the hallway outside my room. "For the security of the house," Mrs. Whitmore explained when I asked, in a tone that made clear the question itself was already a small transgression. The family structure was this: Patricia Whitmore, the lady of the house, the one who actually ran everything. Her husband, Gerald Whitmore, a senior partner at a commercial real estate firm in Midtown Atlanta, who appeared at dinner and on weekends with the air of a man who lives at the office and treats home like a hotel. The older daughter, Ashley, 22, who was away at college and came home for breaks, and the younger son, Chase, 16, who went to private school and treated the household staff like extensions of the furniture, not with active cruelty, but with the complete indifference of someone who was never taught that the people who serve also have names. Patricia was the center of everything. She defined every detail of the house, evaluated every piece of work, determined what was acceptable and what needed to be redone. And she had a specific skill I took a few weeks to name. She humiliated with ease, not by shouting, through tone, through looks, through the comments said while already walking away, as if it wasn't even worth slowing down to deliver. "You call this clean? Really, girl? Those clothes are hanging crooked. Didn't you see that? The biscuits came out dry. The woman before you made them better." Each one came out casual, light, like a remark about the weather, but I felt every one of them, every single one, and I swallowed them. Because I needed the paycheck, because Brianna needed me strong, because my mother had taught me to hold on to myself, but hadn't told me that holding on to yourself sometimes costs you the job. The humiliation that made me stop swallowing happened in my 5th month, a Saturday afternoon with 12 guests in the formal living room, Patricia's friends, women from the same social circle, handbags that cost more than 3 months of my salary. I was passing around the appetizers that Miss Louise had made, moving through the room with the tray, invisible as always. One of the guests, a woman with auburn hair I had never seen before, picked up a piece, bit into it, and said to Patricia, "This is delicious, Patty. Who made these?" And Patricia, without pausing, without looking at me, said in that tone of someone explaining something obvious and unimportant, "Oh, that's the new girl. She does her best. She does her best." I was in the middle of that room, with the tray in my hands, in front of 12 women. She does her best. Not "they're wonderful," not "she made them." She does her best. As if the most I was capable of was an attempt. As if my entire presence there was a failed attempt to be good enough for that space. The auburn-haired guest looked at me. She was the only one who did. With an expression I still can't quite name. It wasn't pity. It was something more uncomfortable than that. Then she looked away. I kept circulating with the tray, kept smiling, kept being invisible. But something in me shifted that Saturday. A voice I had never heard so clearly said, quietly, without anger, "This is where it ends." That night I went down to my basement room, sat on the edge of the old mattress, and called my mother. I didn't tell her what had happened. I asked about Brianna. My mother told me that week she had learned the word butterfly and was saying it about everything. I laughed. Then I hung up and cried quietly in the dark without making noise, the way you learn when you live in your employer's house. What lifted me off that floor wasn't anger, it was a conversation with Miss Louise. The following week, on a Thursday afternoon, my day off, Miss Louise invited me to sit with her in the kitchen while the family was out. We stayed there for almost 2 hours, and she started telling me things, slowly, the way someone does when they weigh each word before letting it go. "Before you, there was a woman from Savannah. She stayed 8 months. She left without getting paid her last 2 weeks. Mrs. Whitmore said she had damaged a piece of furniture and was deducting it. The girl signed the paper and walked out crying. I set down my cup. Do you think it was true? That she broke it?" Miss Louise looked at me. "Darlene, I have been in this house for 6 years. I have seen a lot. Mrs. Whitmore has a way of making you feel responsible for things you didn't do. It's a talent." And before her? A woman from Decatur. 4 months. Mrs. Whitmore told the agency that she had stolen a pair of earrings. The woman denied it, no proof of anything, but Mrs. Whitmore called the agency and said she was dishonest. The woman went months without being able to find work because her name had gotten around. My stomach turned. And nobody did anything? What were we going to do, Darlene? We need the paycheck. They have lawyers, they have money, they have their circles. We have our bag and the bus ride home. I was quiet for a moment. Then I asked, "Do you have a contract? Like a written employment agreement?" She looked at me with an expression that mixed exhaustion and something like embarrassment. "I do, but there are months where I'm not sure my taxes and Social Security are being handled right. I've asked 3 times. Mrs. Whitmore says she'll check with the accountant." That evening, I went back to my room and did something I had never done in that job. I got out my employment agreement and read it. I had signed it on the first day without reading carefully, because I was afraid of losing the opportunity before it started. I read every line, and I found a clause that made me read it twice to make sure I understood. "In the event of damages to property of the household, the cost of said damages may be deducted from the employee's wages upon mutual written agreement." Mutual written agreement. It wasn't outright illegal on its face, but it was a door left wide open. Now I understood how the women before me had left without what they were owed. It wasn't blatant wrongdoing. It was a structure built to make someone walk away before they ever thought to push back. But what kept me awake that whole night wasn't the clause. It was something I had seen 3 weeks earlier that had been sitting in the back of my mind without me understanding how big it was. One afternoon when Mr. Whitmore had stayed home working in his study on the 2nd floor, I went to clean the upstairs hallway and heard, through the intercom system he had left on, a phone call he was having. I didn't hear everything. I heard pieces, but 2 pieces stayed with me. The properties in the Brookhaven development are deeded in her name, but she doesn't know about it. And then, if the partner requests an audit, Patricia's going to be named as the responsible party on documents she never signed. I didn't understand what it meant at the time. I held on to it because I didn't know what else to do with it. That night, after reading the contract, after the conversation with Miss Louise, after thinking about the women who had left before me without what was theirs, I put those pieces together and started to see the full picture. In that kitchen where I worked every day, in that house where I was invisible by their choosing, something was happening that went beyond the humiliations. And I, who they had treated as if I saw nothing, had heard enough to change everything. The bottom came 2 weeks later. Mrs. Whitmore called me into the formal sitting room on a Monday morning. She was in an armchair. I stood. "Darlene." First time she had used my name. That alone told me something bad was coming. "I'm going to need you out of the house by the end of the month." I looked at her. "I'm sorry? We're renovating the basement room. We'll need the space." A pause. "You'll receive your final pay, of course." Final pay. She was letting me go. No real reason. End of month. "What about my other wages? My last week's?" I asked, surprised by how steady my own voice came out. She raised an eyebrow slightly, like the question was a minor inconvenience. "The accountant will calculate everything. You'll sign the paperwork next week." I walked out of that room, down the stairs, into the kitchen, where Miss Louise was peeling potatoes. She looked at me once. I didn't have to say anything. She let you go, Miss Louise said. Not a question. I sat down on the stool. End of month. She was quiet for a moment. Then she put down the peeler, went to a cabinet, came back with a folded piece of paper, handed it to me. Hold on to this. It's the number for an employment attorney. Her name is Sandra Pace. She has an office in Decatur. She works on contingency for domestic workers. She gets paid when you get paid. I should have called her years ago. I took the paper, folded it, put it in my apron pocket, That night, I called my mother. This time I told her. She was quiet for about 3 seconds. Then she said, "Come home, baby." Her voice broke just a little at the end. I said, "Not yet, Mama. I have to do something first." The internal spiral that comes after being let go like that. I know it well. The self-blame that disguises itself as reasonable reflection. Why didn't I leave sooner? Why did I put up with so much? Did I imagine how bad it was? Patricia Whitmore's voice in my head. She does her best. Like it was my definition. I went to sleep with those questions, and I lay looking at the ceiling of that rented room, trying to separate what was legitimate reflection from the story they had planted in me. That I was only enough for what they decided I should do, and that questioning it was overreach. The difference between those two voices got clearer when I picked up the phone and called Sandra Pace. She answered on the second ring. Direct voice. No wasted words. I told her everything in about 20 minutes. The contract, the damage deduction clause, the women before me that Miss Louise had described, the Social Security and tax questions, the termination without real cause, and the pieces of conversation I had heard through the intercom. She was quiet for a couple of seconds after I finished. Then, "Do you have any way to document what you heard through the intercom?" "I didn't record it. I heard it accidentally." "Witness?" "Just me. But the rest, the employment taxes, the termination without documented cause, that clause, that I can work with. I need you to bring the contract, any pay stubs you saved, and any records of payments you have." Friday morning, my office. Friday morning, I was sitting in front of a small office on Commerce Drive in Decatur, with a plastic folder holding everything I had kept. Pay stubs, a photo of the contract taken on my phone, screenshots of payment transfers. Sandra Pace was a woman in her mid-40s, reading glasses, blazer over a simple blouse, desk covered in case folders. The kind of office that doesn't have a leather couch but has more than enough expertise. She spent 40 minutes going through everything, asked questions, I answered. At the end, she took off her glasses and said, "Darlene, you've got a few things working in your favor here. First, your employment taxes. We're going to verify through official channels whether Social Security and Medicare contributions were properly handled on your behalf. If they weren't, that's a violation. Second, that damage deduction clause is aggressive and may not be enforceable depending on how it was applied. Third, your termination needs to be handled correctly. You're entitled to whatever your agreement specifies, and if they try to withhold wages or make unauthorized deductions, that's a wage theft issue we can pursue." I breathed slowly. "How long to file?" If you want to go with a full wage claim plus damages for the hostile work environment, which your documentation supports, I need 2 weeks to prepare. Do you have a witness to any of the specific incidents? Miss Louise, but she still works there. I don't know if she'll agree. Sandra nodded slowly. Understood. We work with what you have. One witness who can confirm a pattern of conduct goes a long way. I walked out of that office into the morning sun with a feeling I hadn't recognized in a long time. The feeling that the ground under my feet was mine. Not borrowed, not on loan. Mine. I wasn't going into this with anger. Anger makes mistakes. I was going in with evidence. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. I kept going to work at the house, kept cleaning, serving, being invisible. Mrs. Whitmore treated me with the indifference of someone who has already resolved a situation and is just waiting for the calendar to move. I smiled, did my job, and held on to everything. During those days, Miss Louise pulled me into the hallway off the kitchen and spoke quietly. "Darlene, something is going on in this house. Last week a man came. Suit, briefcase, looked like a lawyer, but not the family's regular one. He and Mr. Whitmore were in that study for over 2 hours. When he left, Mr. Whitmore was shaken. The next day there were 2 more people. Mrs. Whitmore didn't come out of her room until afternoon. I remembered the pieces of the intercom call. The properties in Brookhaven deeded in Patricia's name. The partner. The audit. "Miss Louise," I said quietly, What else did you catch from those visits? She checked both ends of the hallway. That Mr. Whitmore's business partner is requesting a full review of the real estate contracts, and that there are documents with Mrs. Whitmore's name on them that she apparently never signed. That afternoon I texted Sandra Pace, told her what Miss Louise had described, combined with what I had heard through the intercom weeks earlier. Sandra called back within the hour. Darlene, what you're describing could be relevant testimony in something much larger than just your employment case. What I can tell you is this. If Patricia Whitmore's name was put on documents without her knowledge, she's also a victim. And if that's true, she's going to want to protect herself. That protection might line up with exactly what you need to establish. 2 days later, Sandra received a call from the law firm representing Gerald Whitmore's business partner, requesting an urgent meeting. The meeting was on a Tuesday afternoon, in a conference room at a shared office space on Peachtree Road in Buckhead. I went with Sandra. On the other side of the table was Patricia Whitmore's attorney, and Patricia Whitmore herself. I had never seen Patricia like this, without the coat of authority, without the inventory-taking stare. Shoulders dropped, eyes red from what looked like not enough sleep, those deep burgundy nails still perfect, but something in her had fractured. She looked at me when I came in, and for the first time in 5 months, she actually saw me. Patricia's attorney was direct. Gerald Whitmore had deeded 2 properties from his real estate development to Patricia's name without her knowledge, a strategy to shield assets in case of litigation from his business partners. Patricia had discovered this the previous week. She was being named as a responsible party on documents she had never read. Mrs. Whitmore needs testimony establishing a pattern of her husband's conduct within the household, the attorney said. You, as a live-in employee for 5 months, may have observed relevant situations. Sandra looked at me. I looked at Patricia, the woman who had called me girl for months, the woman who had said she does her best in front of 12 people, the woman who had let me go to renovate a room that was never going to be renovated. She was asking me for help. I paused, then said in a calm voice, "What do you need to know?" The meeting lasted 2 hours. I described what I had overheard through the intercom, the properties in her name, the conversation about the partner. It wasn't much, but it was real. Patricia's attorney wrote everything down. At the end, before we left, Patricia looked at me a second time, and she said, in a voice I had never heard from her before, low, without the lady of the house tone, "I wasn't a good employer to you." I was quiet. "I know I wasn't," she continued. I treated all of you, like..." She didn't finish. I could have said many things. I could have listed every comment, every look, every "she does her best" that still echoed. But I looked at her and said only, I needed to be treated with respect. That was all it ever was. She didn't respond. We left the room. Outside on Peachtree, Sandra put her hand briefly on my shoulder. "You okay?" "Yes," I said. And I meant it. The wage claim was resolved 4 months later. The decision found that employment tax contributions had not been properly handled, with back amounts owed, and awarded damages for the hostile work environment documented in Miss Louise's sworn statement, which she chose to give. Total recovery, $31,400. Patricia's side did not appeal. I heard through people I knew that Gerald Whitmore faced litigation from his business partners over the improperly deeded properties. The divorce was filed about 5 months later. I saw a mention of it in a neighborhood social media group I had joined when I first moved to the Atlanta area. I didn't look for more information. They were no longer part of my orbit. Today I wake up at 6 in the morning in my own apartment in College Park. 2 bedrooms, my name on the lease, signed with my full name and not one letter missing. Brianna is here with me. She arrived 2 months after the settlement, when I finally had the foundation to receive her. The first thing she did when she saw the apartment was run down the hallway with her arms out saying, "Butterfly, mama, butterfly," because she was still calling everything butterfly back then. I sat down on the hallway floor and let her run, and I cried the way that has no shame in it, the kind that is only relief. I've been working as an independent house cleaner for about a year and 2 months. I have 11 regular clients, a schedule I manage myself, and a rate I set based on what the market actually pays. Nobody tells me what I'm worth anymore. I'm in the process of formally establishing my business, working with an accountant Sandra recommended. Within a few months, I plan to bring on another cleaner as a partner. It's mine. All of it is mine. About Patricia, I hear sometimes that the house in Sandy Springs was listed for sale, that she moved to a condominium in Brookhaven, that Miss Louise left too, with everything she was owed, paid in full. I'm glad for that. For all the women who came before me and didn't have Sandra Pace or a folded piece of paper with a phone number in their pocket. In that meeting where the man in the gray suit asked me for his coffee, he was a client of a partner company that had booked a conference room in the same building where I was signing paperwork with my new client that day. The confusion was genuine. The look on his face when he realized was genuine. I watched him shrink, and I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt something cleaner. The confirmation that what he did is automatic, it's common, it's the world running on the wrong setting. We see an apron, and we assume. We see a simple bag, and we categorize. We see a woman from a working-class background in a hallway, and we assign her role before we ever ask her name. That's not going to change overnight. But every story told changes something in someone who is listening. You, who stayed until right now, there are some things I need you to know. Things I learned the most expensive way possible, so you don't have to learn them the same way. If you work as a housekeeper, nanny, cook, caregiver, or in any capacity inside someone's home, you have rights that exist regardless of what your employer believes you deserve. A written employment agreement is your protection. Wages must be paid on time and in full. Withholding or unauthorized deductions can constitute wage theft. If you are paid as an employee rather than a contractor, your employer may have obligations around payroll taxes and social security contributions. Know the difference. Ask questions. If something doesn't feel right about how you are being paid, it may not be. If someone attempts to deduct from your wages the cost of something that broke or went missing, without a proper documented process and your genuine agreement, that may be unlawful. Do not sign anything without reading it, and if you are unsure, seek guidance before you sign. If you have been humiliated at work, called names, degraded in front of others, treated as if you have no name and no standing, made to feel that no matter how hard you work, it will never be enough, that is a hostile work environment. It has a name. It can be documented. There are employment attorneys who work on contingency for domestic workers, meaning they get paid when you do. There are legal aid organizations, worker centers, and domestic worker alliances in cities across the country that offer free guidance. You do not have to navigate this alone. And more important than any technical guidance, if someone uses the power difference between you to make you feel like you are not worth what you do, that is not household management. That is control. It is the logic that says the people who serve do not have a voice, do not have rights, do not have their own dignity. My mother said to hold on to myself. I hold on. But I learned that holding on doesn't mean staying quiet. It means knowing what is yours and going to get it when someone takes it. If I had known my rights from the beginning, I would have acted much sooner. That is why I am telling you now. Thank you for staying until the end. This was a long story, and you stayed. And that means something here touched something that is yours too. Tell me in the comments. What would you do differently if you had known your rights from the very first job you ever had? I want to read every answer. If you know someone who is enduring what they shouldn't have to endure, who is accepting what they shouldn't have to accept because they need the paycheck and don't know there is a way out, share this video. Sometimes the right story reaches someone at exactly the right moment and changes what they do tomorrow. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe right now. My name is Darlene Moss. I'm from Memphis. I'm a mother, I'm a house cleaner, and the coffee I serve today is on my schedule for the clients I choose at the rate I set. The butterfly made it, Brianna, and she's not going anywhere. But let me tell you something I left out. Something that happened in the last week before I left the house. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I was cleaning the upstairs hallway when Ashley, the older daughter, who had come home for a few days, walked past me and stopped. She was 22, away at school, a younger version of her mother but without the ice. She had eyes that still paid attention. She looked at me standing there in the hallway with the mop in my hands and said, "What's your name?" I looked at her. "Darlene." She nodded. Quiet for a second. "You're leaving at the end of the month?" My mom mentioned it. "That's right." She stood there a moment longer, then said, in a strange voice, like someone trying to say something they don't know how to say directly, "I'm sorry about the way things are here. It's not right." I stayed quiet. "I know it's not," she continued, and then she walked away down the hall. I have thought about that scene many times, about how different it is to know something is wrong and to actually do something about it. Ashley knew. She didn't do anything. But she said sorry, and that was more than her mother had offered me in 5 months. Sometimes the people who participate in unjust systems aren't monsters. They are people who were taught this is normal, who were never pushed to question it, who follow the script because the script has never turned against them. Ashley is going to grow up and probably have people working in her home someday. The question is what she will do with the memory of saying sorry in a hallway and walking away. I can't answer that for her. I can only answer for myself. And what I chose, leaving with what was mine, documenting what happened, pursuing what the law allowed, rebuilding with my own hands, that is an answer. It is slow. It is hard work. It is not the dramatic, made-for-TV moment you sometimes imagine. It is waking up every morning and choosing again, but it is mine, and that is worth more than anything that house in Sandy Springs ever could have given me. Let me tell you what a regular morning looks like now. I wake up at 6. I make coffee while Brianna is still sleeping. I sit by the window of the apartment. It looks out onto a small courtyard, nothing grand, but it is mine, and I spend about 10 quiet minutes before the day starts. It is a small luxury I invented for myself. Nobody gave me permission. I gave it to myself. At 7 I get Brianna up. She wakes up grumpy, just like my grandmother who never wanted to be spoken to in the mornings, and spends the first 5 minutes complaining about everything. Then she wants a hug. I give it to her. Then she wants to know if there's hot chocolate. There always is, because now I make sure there always is. At 8 I take her to school. I come back. I pick up my bag, not a designer bag, but clean and organized, and I go to my first client of the day. I ring the bell, the door opens. I walk in with my name, my rate, and my work. Nobody calls me girl. If they did, I would say, my name is Darlene. It is that simple, and it took all of this to learn that simple was possible. There is one more thing I want to leave you with before I go, because when I tell this story the way I just told it, organized, with a beginning, a middle, and an end, with the settlement and the apartment and Brianna running down the hallway, it sounds cleaner than it was. It sounds like I knew what I was doing from the start, like I had courage, like I was strong. I wasn't. There was a night, 3 days after I got let go, when I sat on the edge of the bed in that rented room in College Park with the phone in my hands and almost called my mother to tell her to come get me, that I was giving up, that I was going back to Memphis, picking up Brianna, and pretending Atlanta had never existed. I didn't call, not because I was strong, but because that specific night the exhaustion was bigger than the impulse, and I fell asleep before I made the decision. The next morning, when I woke up, the clarity came back. Not a lot, but enough to open my purse and find the folded piece of paper with Sandra Pace's number on it. Sometimes that's what it is. Sometimes the turning point isn't a moment of light. It's just falling asleep before you give up and waking up one day with a piece of paper in your hand. I don't know where you're watching from right now. I don't know if you're at the beginning, the middle, or the bottom of your own story. But if you're in a place that makes you smaller, that calls you girl without wanting to know your name, that takes from your paycheck what isn't theirs to take, that makes you feel like no matter how hard you try it will never be enough, I need you to know that what you are feeling has a name. And what has a name can be named, and what can be named can be faced. It doesn't have to be today, it doesn't have to be perfect. It needs to be a folded piece of paper with a phone number in the right pocket. The rest comes after. Go down to the comments and tell me, what was the moment you decided, or are deciding right now, that enough is enough? I read everything. I respond, we're in this together. Until the next story, let me tell you about the week Miss Louise decided to give her statement. I never asked her to. I never once asked, because I knew what it cost. Going back to that house every day knowing she had spoken against the woman who signed her paychecks. I understood the weight of that, and it wasn't my place to ask her to carry it. She was the one who called me. A Tuesday night, voice low the way it always was when she was being careful. She said, Darlene, I'm going to call your attorney. I made up my mind. I was quiet for a moment. Miss Louise, you don't have... I know I don't have to. I want to. A pause. I have been watching women come through that house and leave without what was theirs for 6 years. I kept count. 7 women before you. 7. And every one of them walked out without what she was owed because she didn't know she could push back. And I knew. I saw it. And I said nothing because I was afraid. Her voice got steadier. I am tired of being afraid. She gave her statement 2 weeks later. She left the house that same month. Sandra guided her too. She received her full final wages. No deductions, nothing signed without reading first. Today, Miss Louise works at a soul food restaurant in East Point. She sends me pictures sometimes. Last Tuesday, she sent a photo of her smothered chicken that looked like something out of a magazine. I sent her a heart. She sent back 3. That is also part of this story. Not just the settlement, not just the money. Also Miss Louise with her smothered chicken and her fear that finally got tired of being fear. We need each other. The ones who know tell the ones who don't. The ones who went first open the door for the ones coming after. That is how it works. That is how it has to work. You who are listening to this, if you have been through something like this and came out the other side, tell someone who is still inside. If you are still inside and you don't know how to get out, find someone who already did. The chain exists. You just need to find the closest link. And if this video was that link for you today, I'm glad. That is exactly what it is here for. Until the next story, I'll always be here. One last thing. The smallest one. And maybe the most important. About 2 months after the settlement came through, I was at a new client's house for the first time. A woman in her 50s who lives alone in a townhouse in East Atlanta, a retired school librarian. I arrived at 9, rang the bell. She answered in a housecoat with a mug of coffee in her hand. She let me in, showed me around, explained what she needed. And just before she went to sit down with her book, she turned back and asked, "What's your name, honey?" "Darlene," I said. "Darlene." She repeated it slowly, like she was saving it. "Nice to meet you, Darlene. I'm Carol." And she went to her chair. I stood in the hallway for about 2 seconds. Then I went to start work. It is a small thing, but that day, cleaning Carol's kitchen with the radio on low and the morning light coming through the window, I thought about everything it had taken to get to that hallway. The 5 months of girl, the basement room with the window facing a concrete wall, the sleepless nights, the folded piece of paper in the apron pocket, Sandra Pace's voice saying, "Don't sign anything before I see it," Miss Louise's voice saying, "I am tired of being afraid." All of that to arrive at a Tuesday morning where a woman asks my name and repeats it like it's worth keeping. Darlene, it is worth keeping. And so is yours. Whatever it is, until the next story.